to have you all here today for our round bag quarterly. Impressed at people's innovation and bringing them their lunch and the whole thing. Very smart. It's very smart. I never thought of that. We're thrilled to have so many people here today to hear our guest speaker. We are very fortunate to have Sam Schwartz here today. He's brought to us through a collaboration with the Innovation Alliance, and I really want to thank Mark Sharp and Rebecca Rogers for all they did to help make this happen. Sam's working with them and the innovation area on some transportation improvements, particularly with Fowler Avenue, and as we probably all are familiar with that road, it's in need of his help. So thrilled about that, and so we're excited to hear some of his observations today about what he sees happening in other cities and what might be applicable here in our area. Just a little bit about Sam. He is the president and chief executive officer of Sam Schwartz, a firm that specializes in transportation planning and engineering. He was previously New York City's traffic commissioner and was the chief engineer for the New York City Department of Transportation. If he can make things happen there, he can probably make them happen anywhere, I know. And he is a prolific author. He's written several hundred professional papers and presentations, books, blogs, columns on traffic for the New York Daily News, things like that. So we're thrilled to have his expertise, and welcome, Sam.
Thank you for that introduction, Melissa. I must tell you, when I first looked at my schedule, it said BBQ. I thought I was going to a barbecue. I asked Jeff, what are we doing? Was this out in a picnic ground or something like that? But I'm delighted to be here. I'm delighted to be in Hillsborough. I enjoy coming down here. I enjoy even more during the winter coming down here. Please invite me again. Today I'll talk a bit about my book, Street Smart, The Rise of Cities and the Fall of Cars, and also how it relates to what's going on in Hillsborough County and to what's happening in Tampa. And I think this is an important moment in Hillsborough County and Tampa, because there is a lot of energy, there's a lot of concern, there's also a need for change, and a lot of people are recognizing that. And I hear that whether I go to meetings at Tampa Heights or other meetings that I've gone to, there is a real need for change in how we see the street system. So I'm delighted to be here and to talk about that. And let me try to make this work. Maybe I have to do it this way. There we go. So I started to write this book because something happened that nobody seemed to really be focusing on, nobody seemed to notice, nobody could take credit for it, and it was unprecedented. And that is, throughout the history of the United States, this curve went back to 1900, you would see vehicle miles traveled just going straight up. A little blip from World War II, the Depression, immediately after that it went up. Vehicle miles traveled, the amount of driving that people do. Sometime around 2003, 2004, and it varied by state, it started to go down. And this preceded the recession. It accelerated through the recession and continued after the recession. But 10 straight years, VMT in the United States went down. And unprecedented, never happened before. So the book was about why did this happen, how did it happen, and can we take advantage of it? You'll see an uptick in the last couple of years. There's a little bit of a rise, but still per capita VMT in the United States is still down, which is a healthy thing in many ways. And I live in Florida, and Florida VMT started to go down a little bit later, more like 2007, but the same thing in Florida, or on just about any state or city that I've been to, VMT started to go down sometime around the mid-decade. But one of the problems that we find is, even though VMT's been going down, the highway plan, as you heard, that I'm an engineer, and I've also written a paper called True Confessions of a Traffic Engineer. here. We do things like we love to do projections into the future. And so here we are, the Federal Department of Transportation, USDOT, that is seeing a curve like this, but always says BMT is going to soar. And why this graph is important is because it drives federal policy. Do you invest more in transit, or do you invest more in roads? Do you invest more in walking or in driving? And when you look at a curve like this, you're making the argument that we should build more roads on that. So that's why curves like this are very important. And a lot of people say, well, it's only the Great Recession. But what this shows is after every single recession shown in the shaded area, driving picked up instantly, immediately after the recession. This time, it continued to go down after the recession. So it proceeded, started to go down, accelerated, and continued to go down, and per capita is still below what it was. So what happened? Who's driving less? It turns out there's one group that's driving a lot less. And that group are the millennials. And they're not just driving 1 or 2% less. When you deal with macro statistics, you're always impressed if there's a 1 or 2% change. This is a 20 to 25% reduction in driving. Traffic engineers like myself, transportation planners, have been trying to get people out of their cars for decades, and we haven't succeeded. And then all of a sudden, a 20 to 25% drop in driving by a cohort that is now larger than the baby boom generation, and is only growing larger as time goes on. That's wonderful news, I believe, for our country. And you take a look at the percentage of 20 to 24-year-olds with driver's licenses in the United States. You can see it was almost everybody, 93, 94%, and then it continued to go down to where we're in the 70% range today. Why that's important is what we have found is if people don't get a driver's license by 20 years of age, there's only a 50% probability they'll ever get a driver's license. They've learned how to be an adult without getting a driver's license. So why are they driving less? Well, the first thing that we found in our research is neighborhood choice. That when we looked at previous generations, they didn't want to live in cities as much as this generation. They didn't want to live in urban areas. This generation, almost 4 out of 10 of under 30-year-olds want to live in urban areas and live in urban areas, and much lower percentages of the other cohorts. They socialize differently. Social media, less in person. Shopping. Don't have to go out to the store now. You can shop sitting at home. But another thing that government did, that government for some reason never took credit for, but it was an absolutely wonderful thing that began in the mid-1990s, is state after state introduced graduated driver's licensing, making it harder for a 16-year-old to drive with other 16-year-olds in the car. They needed older people in the car. There are more restrictions, more training, and that has had a dramatic impact. One impact, which is wonderful, is the number of 16-year-olds that die in traffic crashes has plummeted by 25%. But another thing, it means that some of the kids don't get driver's licenses at 16 or 17 because it's a hassle, and teenagers don't want hassles, so they go off to college and they don't have their driver's license yet. And they soon learn what? They can live without a car or live without a driver's license, and they can get around so many different ways, and now there are more ways than ever. The sharing economy, you don't need to own a car, you can share a car. You can use a zip car or other kinds. Bike shares. Bike share programs are exploding around the United States. First time I heard about bike share, I thought it would be a cute little thing. Well, it turns out to be a form of transportation now for lots of people. Via, Uber, Lyft, all these different kinds of apps that allow you to get from point A to point B. The student debt, which is the first thing that people said to us when we started on the research, turned out not to be the most significant, far from the most significant. Turns out student debt wasn't that much different than the generation before it in terms of absolute dollars. The backseat rebellion. In interviews with a number of young people, and lots of them were young people who grew up in the suburbs and moved to the cities, their experience of driving was from the back seat of their parents' car. And they remember their parents being really unhappy. Maybe in the 1950s or 1960s, a few of you may remember the commercial, See the USA in Chevrolet. Ernest asking you to call David, remembers that one. And the roads were wide open. Well, sometime around 1970 to 77, depending on where you were, mobility went down in the United States. And it got harder and harder to drive. So the suburbs, it got harder to drive. And here were kids being shuttled from place to place and suffering and listening to parents. And it was parents. Now, it was both parents that were commuting to work. It was no longer the Mad Men days when Don Draper went off to work and Betty stayed home with the kids. Now it was both parents that had to suffer the commute. And both parents just hated shuttling the kids around. And we heard that time and time again, that the younger people, the millennial generation, that they just thought this was an awful way to live, having to be shuttled every single place. And so every time a suburban kid moves to the city, it almost counts twice on that. Then there's another thing that's remarkable. And I kind of learned about this working on the Barclays Center Arena in Brooklyn, also Prudential in New Jersey. And our job was to get sports fans out of their cars. And we had a certain target that we had to reach. In the case of Barclays, Brooklyn, New York, with the Brooklyn Nets, it was at the busiest intersection of Brooklyn. Flatbush Avenue, Atlantic Avenue, Fourth Avenue. If anybody knows Brooklyn, they know how busy that is. So we had to reduce the numbers in order to make the system work to no more a car share than 28%. Nobody's ever achieved that in the United States for any sporting facility, including Madison Square Garden that we worked on. So we began holding focus groups with hardcore drivers. So we identified people that said they'll never take transit to the Barclays Center. They had cars, they're sports fans, they don't know any other way to go, and that's what they want to do. And we started to offer them things in focus groups, and I was on the other side of the window, there's a mirror there watching. And time again, you know, we made offers. What if we gave you a free subway card? It's called a Metro card. It meant nothing to them. And we said, what about if we give you a free hamburger, a Shake Shack burger, whatever? It didn't matter what the burger was. It didn't get them out of their cars. And we offered pictures with players. Nothing worked. This was a stubborn lot. And about the fourth focus group, the facilitators kind of getting a little frustrated. There's got to be something that moves the needle here. Well, he started talking to some of the people, and he found that an individual that he spoke to, he said, well, where do you live? And he lived in a part of Queens, kind of the outer part of the borough of Queens. And he said, well, there's a Long Island Railroad stop that just this 4 blocks from you. And you could take it directly to the arena, where we have an underground connection into the arena. And the person looked at him kind of startled and said, really, it's that easy? He just didn't know. My generation and a lot of middle-aged people don't know how to use transit. The younger generation, let's say some millennials over here, you're a millennial? Okay, you're a millennial? Yeah. Barely? Okay, you're a millennial. You're not a millennial, yeah.
How about the wannabes?
Yeah, a wannabe. Okay, well I can take any one of you millennials to Paris or to Prague or to Seoul. By the way, I'm not taking you.
Yeah, really.
But I can take you anywhere in the world and just drop you off and you would know how to get around. The whole world is open to you now. The mysteries of transit have been unlocked for your generation. You're a millennial, right? And you've traveled and you know how to get around, right?
Paris last month. Yeah.
Paris last month. And what did you do?
Took the metro.
That's right, you took the metro. And even probably knew which car to get in and which staircase to get out on it. It's like all of a sudden you're a pro no matter what city you go to. So what my generation faced, what the generation right after me faced, is we really didn't know the transit systems. We knew how to drive places. The younger generation just knows how to get around. And for the younger generation, freedom doesn't mean what it meant for me. So freedom for me, back when I started driving, and this is a slide from Paolo Santi from MIT, but freedom for me, my first car was actually a 1960 Chevy Impala with the big fins. Remember that tag? And I thought I would impress people, impress the girls with it. It didn't work. So freedom was to have this car, that's what we thought it was. Well, freedom for this generation, they don't even know the makes of cars often. They just know a car is something with four wheels, maybe it's an Uber, maybe it's a Lyft, whatever. Freedom is their mobility portfolio. They have an army of ways of getting around, and it's all in their phones. They can get around anywhere. They can go out at night, party at night, and not worry about how they're going to get back because they know they will get back in some way. It's a different world. It's a different world. So Tampa, Hillsborough, you have to take advantage of that. The places that are doing the best are the ones that are recognizing this changing generation and these changing desires. This is an opportunity, and it's an opportunity not to miss. So how do they get around without cars? Another thing this generation really is into is health. They want to be healthy. They're wearing Fitbits. I bet there's somebody out here wearing a Fitbit. Right, there we go. I want to be over there, Paul. Okay. And incorporating working out or walking, biking, or even taking transit burns over 20% more calories than taking a car. They want to incorporate that in their daily routine. And their biking distances, and if you make it, if you build it, they will come. But if you have streets like Fowler, which you wouldn't want to ride a bike on, they will not ride a bike on those streets. So this generation is, if you build it, they will come on it. And this one, I just love the graphic which came from the group called Transportation Alternatives, but all the wonderful things about walking. And if you read just about anything, it's the healthiest thing. It's really the most natural thing that we can do, from physical health to mental health to weight loss, reducing pollution, stimulates the economy, and then I added increases romantic opportunities. And the reason is, with that big Chevy Impala and huge fins, I never got a date. But walking I did very well. My wife of 40 years now, I met her walking. So it pays off to get out there and walk. That's very cost effective. The other thing that I've been learning over the last 5 or 6 years is the health community wants to work with us, the planning community, the transportation community, because they see it as a health issue. The first time I saw this was at a Chicago planning organization, I think it's CEO of Chicago, and the co-chair of the transportation committee was a pediatrician. And I asked, well, how come you're on the transportation committee? He said, well, I'm tired of seeing my patients, he worked in a hospital, emergency room, tired of seeing my patients, children, in the emergency room after being hit by cars, or being in the emergency room because they had diabetes, or they were obese, or they even had cardiovascular conditions. He said, we've got to change our transportation systems. It's a huge health issue. This is a map of Toronto. And where you walk, where walking is convenient, diabetes incident is lower. Cardiovascular is lower. Stroke is lower. Where you have more driving, less walkable areas, diabetes, obesity, cardiovascular goes up. So you can look at the form of a city, of a region, and tell something about the health of that region. And the Surgeon General has now recognized it. And I think that's important for a planning organization like this, because, and I saw Melissa was nodding her head, because there is money from the health community now. We were actually hired to go to some rural areas in my company by a health organization to explain to people about the benefits of walking and biking and other things, because the rural areas in particular are suffering from high obesity levels. So all the benefits, the Surgeon General has a campaign that is supposed to match the anti-smoking campaign. So it's an opportunity for planners, for engineers, for the health community to get together and make exciting things happen. And how do you encourage active transportation? Density is really important. The more you just have sprawl, the less opportunity you have for active transportation. Safety is important. Safe cycling, convenient cycling, and thinking about how bikes will be parked. Connections, connected communities. Cul-de-sacs are one of the worst things to have in terms of the design of a community because it disconnects that community. Traffic systems and designs with pedestrians and cyclists in mind. Yesterday I crossed Fowler Avenue. I recorded it on my phone. I won't show it to you because it took over 7 minutes for me to get across.
Oh my God.
And even when I got to the final leg, which is that free right turn, the cars wouldn't stop with me. I was in the crosswalk and they're zipping by. So we have to change a lot of things in Hillsborough County and Tampa about how we treat our pedestrians and have safety there. Coordinate good transit, key. Coordination of the different modes. The laws that would make it illegal to not yield to a pedestrian in situations like that. Education programs. And equitable transportation. One of the things that we do is we've left out our lowest income people. Even at a meeting that I was at last night, somebody said, well, everybody drives. That's not true. There are elderly people that can't drive. There are low-income people that don't have cars. There are children. There are people with disabilities that can't drive. And we can't forget about that portion of the population. And we see too much. Public transportation systems in so many places are an afterthought of something that we give to poor people. And that just is wrong. That is not how we should view public transportation. And start young. Encourage your children to walk. And safety. Hillsborough, Tampa, you really need to rethink your streets. These statistics are not things to be proud of. 51 people killed in Hillsborough traffic crashes in 2015. That's like an entire borough in New York City where you have so many pedestrians. 50% increase over 2014. Number 2 in the nation, and I think number 1 is also a Florida city. So.
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
It's top 4.
This one I find amazing, that this is the deadliest area for bike riders. I see so few bike riders, and maybe it's because the others have been killed off. I saw your publication, right? I took one of it, 20 bike riders, another cyclist was killed over here. But the rate of cycling deaths here must be way off the charts. In fact, Florida is way off the charts. Compared to any other state, no other state has a fatality rate that comes close to Florida's traffic fatality rate, particularly pedestrian fatality rate. And so that's why we have to rethink. In the rating of the 30 largest metropolitan areas, Tampa was near the bottom of the list, 28 out of 30. So another reason to change. But the good news is millennials want to live here. And they want to change it here. And they want to be able to walk here, bike here, go out to restaurants or go out to clubs and enjoy themselves and have public areas. Your millennial population jumped by over 40%. And these are people that drive a lot less. So your planning has to reflect a changing demographic on it. And you have to rethink streets. Here's ways that you can rethink streets. Example in Amsterdam Avenue is what we did in West Hollywood. I like to call it Melrose Place, but it's Melrose Avenue. And then when I look at Fowler Avenue, those are the ingredients for 0 pedestrians or for pedestrian casualties that even attempt to cross. So when I tried to get from here to here, that took 7 minutes to get there. This is where nobody would yield to me. And then I tried going back and nobody would yield to me.
What cross street?
That's McKinley, right?
Yeah, it's just down the block from DOT.
That's right, just down the block from the DOT. So, what? Now it's not enough to just say, oh, let's build a wider crosswalk. Let's add 2 seconds to the crossing time. There are so many things that say to me about this intersection that is not designed for pedestrians. Free right turns are not conducive to pedestrians. When you have a free right turn, watch where the people are looking. They're not looking in front of them, they're looking over their shoulder to see if anybody is coming in that direction. And so this is an ingredient for it. A long crossing like this that isn't even straight is an ingredient for it. Speeds, a road that is designed for 60 miles an hour is not a good ingredient for pedestrian safety. have multiple phases, and some of the signals in the Hillsborough County are timed for 4-minute cycle lengths. That's the time for the signal to repeat itself. 47 years ago, when I took my first traffic engineering course, I was told 2 minutes. That's what you said, this the limit, that's long for a cycle length. 4 minutes means you're going to have unbelievable cues in every single direction on it. When I was out here, this was backed up the entire way. It was 4 o'clock yesterday. I saw intersection blockage spill back that looked like New York City. I mean, that's what it looked like over there. And so we've got to rethink that. And I'm just going to show you some things. Doesn't mean this is what we're doing on Fowler, but we've got to jar things up over here. What if it looked something like that? What if we began to calm the street down and it looked like a Frederick Law Olmsted Parkway? And it was tree-lined, so it wasn't so hot to walk in it. That you had some refuge areas here and there that you could sit and enjoy and get some shelter when it starts to pour and other things. Places are doing this. They're putting roads on diets. And so this is one possibility, and we'd love your input. We'd like to work with planning organizations so that we can get ideas. We're getting ideas from lots of people now. Imagine instead of looking at this, look how unfriendly this looks for pedestrians. I think there is a pedestrian who's raised somewhere. I thought I saw it in the shop. I saw a bike rider through here this morning. What if it looked like that? What if this became enlivened with university students? What if the land use was land use that looked interesting with shops and coffee shops and other things? When you design a road for 50 or 55 miles an hour, your line of sight is a cone. You do not see the land use on either side. You do it for 30 miles an hour, suddenly you see, oh, there's a store, there's a shop. It's good for business. Slower traffic is good for business. I'm not talking about necessarily congestion. So we'd love your ideas on some of this. And this is not just on the East Coast, it's the West Coast. We're traveling all around. From Boise, Idaho to Fargo, North Dakota, Dallas, Grand Rapids, places are doing this. And they are recognizing that the millennial generation wants something different. When I was in Grand Rapids, meeting with the mayor and meeting with the head of the real estate program there, they were telling us that they have this warehouse district that we're all working on. And they want to attract young people. They want to attract tech companies, innovation districts. And the real estate person was saying, you're showing a property to a CEO from a tech company. And I imagine that CEO was probably 23 years old. And he's explaining, look at this, how much space, and look at all the parking you have. And the CEO went back to him and said, well, where do you park the bikes? Where are the bike lanes? How do we walk here? And suddenly he had a whole realization. He's dealing with something that he hadn't seen before. And he had to change his thinking, and that's why we were called to that. And this is, every city is now, not every city, but the ones that are the most enlightened are experiencing something like this. A short clip I will show you from Metro Rail.
The geography of innovation is shifting. To find an innovative economy 20 years ago, a worker needed to drive to a secluded research park, work in isolation, and keep ideas secret. Today, proximity is everything. Workers want to be in urban places that are walkable, bikeable, hyper-caffeinated, where they can bump into other workers and share ideas. Firms also want to be close to other firms, research labs, and universities in collaborative spaces so that smart ideas can be turned into smart products for the market. Innovation districts are this century's productive geography. They are both competitive places and cool spaces, and they will transform your city and metropolis.
Now, working with the Alliance, this is the message that we're getting. They're looking to make this into a cool city, making it a more walkable city, and a city that, in fact, will require less energy, carbon footprint, but produce more human energy. And what does it all mean? Well, in the United States, it means far fewer road deaths. It means less gasoline consumed. It means our carbon footprint gets reduced. We're healthier. It means we save money. Cities grow in population, and livable cities become magnets where GDP soars. And there is a correlation between GDP and driving. It's an inverse correlation. The more driving you do, the lower your GDP. It's inefficient to try to solve all your problems through driving. You can do far more business by having good transit connections, and instead of 2 meetings a day, you can have 6 meetings a day with a good transit system if you're in business. The other thing I call this, where do the brains go? And the venture capitalists follow the brains. They throw the money at the brains. And look at where the venture capitalists are spending money. Direct relationship with transit ridership, inverse relationship with car usage. And this is why, with both the GDP reason, the venture capital reason, that a lot of cities around the country are beginning to look at mobility solutions. The other thing is how we view our transit systems. Back in, when I said 1969, my professor was Vukan Vucic, and he was from Serbia, and he had traveled Europe, and he was telling us about the transit systems of the world. And he talked about the Paris system and how wonderful the Paris system was, and England and London too. And then he turned to Moscow, and he said, in Moscow, they have chandeliers in the subway stations. They're magnificent subway cars. If you go to Moscow on a Saturday night, you will see a couple dressed, the woman in a gown, the man in a tuxedo, on their way to the opera. And then he turned to me, the lone student from New York City, and he said, can you imagine people wearing gowns and tuxedos on a New York City subway in 1969? Well, you could not imagine. But it turns out that the transit systems that are the best transit systems are the ones that are all inclusive. That if you design a transit system for the poor people in your community, it will be a poor transit system. It will not get the same kind of power and effort if you design a system that is all inclusive. And we see so many transit systems that are built mainly to move the poor around very poorly. 30-minute headways, broken down buses, awful travel times. We see that throughout the country, but the best systems, if they're in Chicago or New York or others, are attracting the people in the tuxedos. Los Angeles has recognized this. The car capital of the world has said, we don't want our transit system to be known as the system that the other people use. All people should be using the transit system. And so they're building up their transit system, and now they're getting more and more people from all economic classes in the transit system. And we know this is a time of great change, with Uber coming on the scene and Lyft and some 30 other kinds of services. And cities have to be ready for them. And cities shouldn't just buy in and drink the Kool-Aid of what these companies are telling you. There are good parts to what these companies are telling you, and then there are a lot of other things where they don't work. And if they're going to cannibalize your transit system, then it's a mistake. If they're going to support your transit system, then it helps. So you have to be really thoughtful about this. You don't turn over your cities to these services. And then I warn you, whatever you think is the power of an Uber, the power of autonomous vehicles is going to be 10 times that power. The money being invested in autonomous vehicles right now is tremendous. And there's a lot of hype about how they're going to solve every problem. They will not be thoughtful about it. They can be wonderful. But if they lead to all of us having our own independent autonomous vehicle and becoming as anti-social as we can, and we don't do any kind of physical activity, this is the future.
Well, then what do you want to do? I don't know. Something.
We forget how to use our legs. Our legs gives us such a good form of transportation, and they're so healthy, and we get so many benefits out of that. So we've got choices. We can make appealing walking areas. We can have good transit, make it more convenient. We can have higher ridership, lower traffic demand, and choose this path. Or a lot of places are just saying, let's have more lanes. Let's keep trying to solve that problem. And it doesn't work. It doesn't solve that problem. You here in Tampa, you've got the demand. There are people that want to get out there and bike, but they're afraid to bike. You have the leadership. I spoke to your mayor in writing my book, and he talked about, he wanted Tampa to be a place where the children come back and return to live. Because so many cities have become a place, so many counties have become a place where the children just run from. And this is very effective. Build it, he wants it to be better than one that he inherited. And you have innovation, you have creativity, you have talent. And you have a plan, and I'm sorry that the referendum isn't on the ballot. Look at Los Angeles. They have a $120 billion referendum on the ballot right now. You've got to fight, and I know you're fighting already. You have to fight even more and continue that fight. And this is what Los Angeles did. This is Los Angeles in 1990. Before Measure R, which was $40 billion. Now look at the rail lines. By 2040, it will be saturated. Los Angeles was a great transit city 100 years ago. Then they destroyed the red cars. They destroyed the streetcars throughout LA, but throughout the United States, most of the United States. LA tried to build highways and build their way out of traffic congestion. If there was traffic congestion, they added another highway, they added another lane. It didn't work. They have tried. That's been the experiment of trying to build a city only for the car. They've come full circle now, and their investments, $120 billion. Watch that referendum in November. I certainly hope it passes. But that will be extraordinary. This will be Mecca. This will be the place to learn about transit from going into the future. And one of the things that thwarted the plans, now as I mentioned, I'm a traffic engineer, transportation engineer, PE. We get in the way. We get in the way, we say there are guidelines that you have to follow. That the guidelines come down from some deity up there. And I have a presentation, I'm not going to go through all of it, it's 10 different items. Another time if you invite me back, maybe I'll talk about them. I don't know why I got stuck over here, but okay. And these are 10 transportation myths it's never get people out of cars. It's a zero-sum game, but just a couple I want to leave you with. One, it's not so hard to have a design manual. The reason it is important to have a design manual is that engineers, my colleagues, need a book to go to. Oh, if it's in the book, it's okay. If it's not in the book, it's not okay. And if they're using the Manual of Uniform Traffic Control Devices, it's not okay. A lot of the things. But we have somebody here in the Tampa area, Paul Benway, who's also the president of the Institute of Transportation Engineers, and who was instrumental in getting the Institute of Transportation Engineers to join with the National Association of City Transportation Officials and put out a document that is a more livable, breathable document that reflects the times. We need to adopt those kinds of manuals in Hillsborough County by the engineers, for FDOT to adopt a lot of these manuals so people can go back to them and say it is in the manual. And then the myths. The engineers will always tell you wider lanes are safer lanes. There's no truth to that. In fact, there's some evidence that the narrower you make the lanes, the more cautious people are, and the fewer casualties that you have. I wrote about Barcelona in my book. They have almost no pedestrian casualties a year. You can count it really on your hands, which, any casualty is too much, but it's a city of 1.4 million, and it is a city that has a huge tourist population. What they do, and I asked the traffic commissioner, they changed, by the way, the name to the Department of Mobility, and he said, we make the lanes very, very narrow, and that slows the traffic down, and so you have fewer casualties. This is work by the Transportation Research Board saying that there's no safety benefit going to the wider lanes on it. What are the other ones? Adding highway capacity, Lewis Mumford must have uttered this 50 or 60 years ago. Adding highway lanes to deal with traffic congestion is like loosening your belt to cure obesity. And a lot of people thought about this induced traffic. Tony Downs and others were writing about it. And then there was a pretty big study of 20 cities done by Duranton and Turner for the Transportation Research Board. And they found the more you build it, the more people will drive. The less you build, the less people will drive. And a new roadway diverts little traffic from other roads. And the corollary is if you knock it down, they will disappear. And so this is one. I was the engineer in 1973 when the West Side Highway collapsed. In the 1980s, I became chief engineer. I tore the whole highway down. New York City is doing really well without this highway. Not well, great. This is a Gold Coast now, but we converted it into a boulevard. And the same thing with the Embarcadero in San Francisco. You can see the major limited access highway that they had suffered damage in an earthquake. Their engineers looked at what happened in New York. They contacted us. They tore it down. And the Embarcadero in San Francisco is just doing great now. So that is the message that I want to impart to you. This is an opportunity for Tampa. It's an opportunity for Hillsborough County. It's an opportunity to attract more and more young people, and for those young people that are here to make life even better for them, and make life better for the lower income people, for the senior people. We have an opportunity here in Hillsborough. Let's seize it. Thank you very much.
Does anyone have a question?
Hi.
No, you're not.
Hello. Hello. So let me ask you, since you work all over the country, right, and you're here, you know, in Tampa right now during our wonderful summers, right? You know, when it comes to walking particularly, or let's say biking, I mean, I think the reality is that a 10-block walk in Tampa, you know, on August 30th, you know, or July 30th, is a far different experience than other parts of the country. So, in your design work, but you know, and so we often go to these kind of seminars, and you know, we hear this kind of information, but it's never catered or never addressed about how design requirements or things might be different in a place like Tampa, where again, you know, a 10-block walk, when you get back to your office, you're going to be sitting in a pool of your own sweat the rest of the afternoon, you know, versus other parts of the city. So in your experience, I mean, do you find that to be true, or you know, have you reckoned with this in any way?
Sure. Yes, and in fact, if you just go to that intersection that I showed you, just turn the corner and go to USF, suddenly you see lots of trees. The temperature drops 5 or 10 degrees when you're walking on the campus over there as opposed to Fowler Avenue. There is design that can bring the temperatures down. The more asphalt you have in the city, the hotter the heat island effect, the hotter the city. On the island of Aruba, which is always over 90 degrees, we redid the main street. And some of it was trees, some of it we provided little shades through urban design treatments. You have to reflect the setting that you're in, and you're absolutely right. In this setting, it has to be one in which you have high temperatures, and you have to deal with it. New York City is as hot today as Tampa is. Lots of people are bike riding and walking. And if you have an encouraging environment, they will do it. Same thing with the weather the other way. Go to Copenhagen in the winter, and you'll find everybody is still riding their bike covered with snow or rain or sleet, and they're still doing it. People will do it, especially the younger generation. You and I may not get out there, but you will find these guys out here, they're going to be out there, and they will take pride. I know people in my company that have taken pride in 365 straight days of bike riding. So we have to know that there are people that are different than us and grew up differently than us.
Anyone else?
Sam, this isn't really so much a question as it is a request. Do you have anywhere in your schedule opportunities to actually appear and present before our metropolitan planning organization, the people that actually are voting on things like TBX and road widening and express lanes? very, I don't know if I see any of them sitting here. If you're here, please raise your hand if you have a vote. They need to see this. We've seen it. The people that are opposing TBX have seen it. We've been talking about it for a whole year. But sometimes I feel like I'm talking to the Flat Earth Society. They don't accept the things that you're talking about, but they seem to be thought leadership ideas, but the leadership ideas don't make it to the decision makers. So if you could, show up at a meeting, August 2, whatever, public comment, get on the agenda. Beth Alden is here. Get on the agenda, talk to them. You're wonderful, by the way. Thank you for being here.
Is there, you know?
Sure, I know we're invited, just put down BBQ and I'll be there.
I don't need that. Do you need me to speak on it? Okay. In the engineering guidelines that you follow, and you spoke about having a design manual and all of that, is there anything that says that 24 hours a day there should never be congestion on your interstates, and that people should have the ability to drive at 45 miles per hour at all times of day?
Great question, because for many, many years, the way we designed our roads is we should never have congestion. Every road should be level of service A. I don't know if you know the grades we give from A to F. And we should always strive for an A, because you've learned that in school, strive for an A. It turns out that A may be the wrong thing. I had this debate in Los Angeles. Their Broadway is their main street, and their Broadway used to rival New York City's Broadway in Times Square 100 years ago with pedestrians and activity and land use. And I did the myths presentation there, and in the myths presentation, I explained how we can change things and we may slow the traffic down, and they said, but we have to achieve level of service A. We have level of service A today on Broadway, but I said you have a dead street. That you don't have to have level of service A all the time. Middle of the night, fine. But actually, some congestion in a main street area does mean the GDP rises. People remember that cone. People see the stores. They want to stop there. It's more comfortable to walk there. When it's on a limited access highway, again, do you spend a ton of money just to solve a 2-hour problem when 22 hours of the day, or 140, 156 hours of the week, you're okay? That's questionable, and traffic engineers for years tried to do that. Many, many years ago, in the 1930s, they came up with the realization that they couldn't solve every hour, and there was the 95 percentile rule, and now they seem to have put that aside, or at least some people
Good afternoon, and thank you for being here. My question is specific to your work with the Alliance. And I'm sure they told you, like, Fowler is a byproduct of the thousands of jobs that are costing in that area. Are you guys looking at anything beyond a road diet for Fowler? Other alternative transportations?
Sure. Tell us what you think we should look at. We just got started yesterday. It was our first day on the job. I already heard some ideas of we should be working with USF, and we should try to reduce their traffic in some way. There are ways of reducing demand, and if you can reduce demand, then your traffic problems become simpler. When people are in transit or other forms of transportation, your problems become simpler. So the answer is yes, but we just got started. So anybody here or anybody watching, please send in your suggestions. We want to hear from all of you.
My question is kind of bounce something off of what Rick talked about. Because Rick was talking in front of the MPO. Part of the MPO, the board on the MPO, some of them are appointed, but some of them are actually elected officials for some of the different jurisdictions, which is why it's a pretty good board to speak in front of. That being said, as far as the decision makers, which Rick was talking about, which specifically refers to the elected officials, we have several jurisdictions within Hillsborough County here. The dilemma within the county that many of us are aware of and many are not aware of is how some of our roadway networks traverse through the responsibility for those roadway networks lies upon the different jurisdictions. For example, in the city of Tampa, there's over 50 miles of road that's really controlled by unincorporated Hillsborough County. A lot of people don't realize that. So there are also certain number of miles of road that are controlled by the FDOT. So as far as what people would like to see, people that are traversing, these thoroughfares don't really know what the responsibility is. It's nice to be able to say, yeah, we need to be able to fix this, but there's really got to be some serious coordination. Plus, we have this, really interesting situation that, yeah, we're a metropolitan area, but 2/3 of our county is suburban. So we're having to deal with that issue too. So, any thoughts about how we might be able to facilitate that process as far as, getting them all to coordinate a little bit better and get the message out to the general electorate, people that are actually going to decide whether or not we're going to be able to move forward with this.
Just about everywhere has jurisdictional issues. Every place I've gone, counties, states, there are some federally designated roads. So the jurisdictional issues aren't so unique here. But getting people to work together, I think the best example of that are places like Los Angeles or Salt Lake City, where you find officials, and by the way, this crosses the aisle, whether it's Democrats or Republicans, you find on the city level that there are plenty of enlightened Republicans, plenty of enlightened Democrats, and also plenty of unenlightened in both parties on that. So look to those examples. Los Angeles has a huge suburban population, and somehow they got Angelenos about 7 years ago to impose a tax on themselves to provide for transit, which most of them do not use transit. And now they're trying again to build that kind of Los Angeles 2040 that I showed you. And they are succeeding, and they're working with all the organizations. Caltrans in the beginning was as obstinate as could be. In fact, every state DOT, federal DOT, was obstinate that I've ever come into. And then there's always some enlightened people, and I have found some people at FDOT that are terrific. They're really trying to change things. And not in the majority yet. We're working on it. Read my book, you'll realize when I was at DOT how it is sabotage. Getting some things happen. There are some people that FDOT that are probably willing to do that.
I wanted to first thank you, because every time I hear you speak, I learn so much, and it's so interesting. And this time, in terms of the manual, and this maybe goes back to you a little bit, but would that be like issued by this district DOT, by the county? My second thing is, I was really fascinated by the cycling of the lights, 4 minutes. I've always thought we had these crazy lights here that go on and that turns into speedways, and then the other places that are less traveled are backed up. I heard that was a very intentional policy done by Bruce B. Downs, road up by Fowler is named after his traffic engineer here. So, I mean, it seems like the first thing we do, and can that just be done easily, like technologically?
Change the traffic signals. Yeah, I mean, one of the things that you realize is if you have 4-minute cycles, you only have 15 times to get through that loop, and so the queue becomes twice as long as if you had a 2-minute cycle length. Now, the reason you can't go down to 30 seconds is that you need minimum crossing times, you need minimum durations, but there is an appropriate cycle length. I think, this is just a theory I have around the United States, is sometime around the 50s or 60s, signal manufacturers realized that they could make a lot of money if they sold more signal hardware, so that the right turns get protected, the left turns get protected, the pedestrians get protected. So that's why your cycles have turned into being so many cycles, so many multiple cycles that are almost unheard of. What was your first part, Pat?
About the manual, like who does the manual? Is it a county
That's a
manual
good
or
question.
district?
I don't know.
Seven? I just didn't.
Right now there is a joint manual. Paula, there's one that NACTO has. I don't think CAMP is part of NACTO.
No, and I wish and I encourage, Spokane County and the city to get more involved with the National Association of City Transportation Officials. NACTO is a new organization that has blossomed all over the country, and it is all about city transportation officials. They are probably the most progressive transportation organization you can imagine. They're really using a lot of flexibility, a lot of innovation in coming up with designs that meet the needs of urban cities. They are fantastic. I am the international president for the Institute of Transportation engineers. We call ourselves actually engineers. We are more and more progressive, and I am a very progressive urban planner myself. And a lot of collaboration has been going on over the last year and a half since I come into leadership position, to collaborate with NACTOs, to collaborate with the CNUs and APAs and other organizations that are truly listening to the trends and the statistics that Sam has relayed to us. I have pushed myself not only to collaborate with these progressive organizations, but also change what we as engineers are doing. You know, supporting new methods of performance measures that really look at all people and people first, not cars. You know, to build a really comprehensive transportation system that is smart and sustainable moving forward to meet the generations that are brought behind us. Not what boomers want or desire or what we've experienced in our lives, but that represent the communities of the new generations. So thank you, Sam, again, and I know we've been around for a long time. I read your book cover to cover in one day, I think. And I appreciate you coming down to Tampa and sharing with our community the possibilities and the opportunities we really do have here in Tampa.
Before we continue, it's going on 1 o'clock, so Sam is available to stay a little bit longer if you want to stay and continue to ask questions of him, but he will have to leave within the next 20 minutes, half hour, I believe, for an appointment. We do these informational barbecues, which stands for Brown Bag Quarterly. You're invited to bring your lunch. It happens every quarter, and the next one will be near the end of October, and if you left us the email address, you'll get our newsletters and announcements. Okay, thank you so much for attending. Yeah.
Has it been pre-approved for CM already? Or?
It's pending? Yes.
I read your book and I was really moved. I've also read Jeff Speck's book because we know that you all are involved in Tampa, and it's very, very exciting. It's refreshing. We know that millennials are moving closer to cities. They want that type of life. You made a book about accessibility, or a point in your book about accessibility, and that's something that I believe we lack so much in Tampa. Everything is on the highway and it's so dependent. So I would encourage you, because I read through the TID plan, the Tampa Innovation Alliance District Plan. I also read about the Gateway Express. I eat this stuff in my free time, I love it. But one of the things I wanted to definitely press on this whole issue with the Innovation Alliance District, get those traffic counts, get them from T-BARTA, get them from HART, because right now they don't know what those are. We need to know those riderships, those are key points. I would also encourage you, if you have an opportunity, and I really appreciate your time here, I'm not saying that you didn't do enough, but go to the neighborhoods. We have a lot of incomplete sidewalks in the Innovation Alliance District. 141st Street is one example, even on 15th Street over there is one example. There's standing water on the roadways, which can lead to a lot of hygienic issues. So when we're looking at transportation, we also have to look at land use, and I think that's the key to having a successful district. So, and I know you're aware of that, but just definitely press those questions and those issues with those leaders in that project in particular. But one thing I wanted to ask you is, because we're talking about Caltrans, and they're exploring what's called a miles per usage. I wanted to find out what your thoughts were. I think the pilot program was launched this month for that, and do you see that being a good supplement for financing on transportation? Do you think there's any value in that?
Yeah, I'm not familiar with it. Is this based on person miles as opposed to, or is this this is the Oregon?
Well, Oregon, you're right. Oregon actually did one, but now Caltrans is exploring, because obviously.
So it's a VMT charge is what you're talking about.
Yeah, because what's happening is a lot of these Priuses and Teslas out there, they're so efficient. You can't get a lot from your local gas tax, so now everybody's freaking out about, we got to fund transit, we got to fix our own roadways. So I just wanted to get your take. Do you see any value in that? Is that something that that should be explored any further?
Oh yeah. So there are different ways of collecting revenue. One is the gas tax, but a couple of places are trying to look at total miles driven. And with electric cars, they still cause just as much congestion, but they don't use gas. so you don't solve your congestion problem. So vehicle miles traveled charge is one way to do it. I believe pricing is an excellent strategy for a lot of reasons, and we will get to the day where you can price per road. So for example, in Manhattan, I think taking your SUV on Fifth Avenue should be charged the most. Riding one of the outer avenues should be less than that. So yes, I think we're heading in that direction. I think it's appropriate. I think if some of the revenue is used for public transportation and some of it is used for roads and bridges. If you want to check a plan that I've been pushing in New York City, it's called Move New York. Go to iHeartMoveNewYork.com, and it's about really having balanced transportation systems. The best transportation systems recognize some percentage are going to drive, but we swung the pendulum way too far. So in European cities, it's not unusual to meet with the transportation officials, and they say our goal is 22% driving, and then we have other goals for transit, other goals for walking on it. In Tampa and Hillsborough County, you may be for 85-90% driving. Some big numbers like that. It's swung too far. So there is a place for driving, absolutely. And for driving, that is a cost to society, and that should be appropriately priced. For some reason, when we talk about a transit rider, we talk about a subsidy. But when we talk about roads to cars, we don't use the word subsidy. I want to change that.
Thank you for also turning me over to the Chapistas, about the parking guy who is like learning to minimize a lot of parking spaces and just look at strategies for that. I follow them, they're hilarious. It's great. Yeah, thank you.
What was your saying?
Yes.
Yeah, thank you for your time. Just had a quick question. You come from a lot of highly dense urban areas, New York, and we can talk about Chicago and Europe. Tampa in general is a sprawl city. Many of the cities in Florida are. When you talk about road dieting, something like Fowler Avenue, you talk about killing other arterials that are parallel to it. In a typical grid system, you have so many close block arterials right next to each other, so if you road diet something, the cars have somewhere else to go easily. If you were to do that to Fowler, now Fletcher, which is to the north, and Bush to the south, would get crushed by traffic in the interim, maybe as we move forward. Are there any examples where you have, or this type of planning has been used in sprawl type areas and is successful?
Yeah, Los Angeles is doing it. Los Angeles is beginning to put roads on diets. Here, there are a couple of roads in Tampa that are being put on diets that are, we see that. This concept that you build more and wider lanes. I can tell you Fowler isn't working now. So to think that adding lanes will work, that's not going to work. But it's been shown that, especially with the changing demographics, that if you begin to slow down the traffic, it doesn't mean fewer vehicles. It may mean that the vehicles don't travel at 55 miles an hour during the free flow periods on Fowler, that you might not see the kinds of diversions that you're anticipating. It's not going to kill Fletcher, it's not going to kill other communities. And I can turn you on to a number of the studies, Duran and the other studies that I mentioned from Transportation Research for highways that have been removed. There is a whole Congress of New Urbanism that document highways that have been removed and the traffic hasn't gotten any worse. Of course, I told you the story, the West Side Highway traffic didn't get worse, the economy got better. More people are coming in. So places where you make it more conducive to pedestrians and bike riders, more people come in, more people shop, more people enjoy themselves. I think you've overdone it here, and you're not the only ones, but you've overdone it. The real question is, can you tolerate the high fatality rate that you have? Is this a district where you can accept 51 fatalities? The size of big cities often don't have 51 fatalities. Can you continue to tolerate being number one in bicycle fatalities? Because you want to save 30 seconds or a minute on Fowler, which you're not doing a good job of right now.
He makes a good point about alternate routes, though. I mean, it's an excellent question. You take an area with really not that many people, you've got them all just collectively going to the one roadway. It's an unsolvable. Do you add two more smaller Fowlers that are beautiful little promenades, it would be great. I love what you're saying, but he makes an excellent point, and it's a difficult, I don't know how do you solve that? If there's really only one access point between those. Those roadways are a mile apart from each other. And the roads on the inside are, I guess you could try to make those more viable.
Your funnel and marble example last night.
Yeah. So
Just asking.
one of what both of you are imagining is it has to be a win-lose situation.
Yeah.
It could be a win-win. And the funnel and marble is what they've done in a number of places. And we actually do a little bit of New York City, and Zurich does a lot of it, and you see it on highways. It's called metering of traffic. Just sending all the traffic into Fowler at once ends up jamming Fowler, which sends traffic over to Fletcher. So you already have that happening. What if you can reduce the traffic congestion on Fowler and still move the same number of people on Fowler? In North Carolina, they created super streets to do that. And the super streets are safer. They've eliminated the turns. They have these mid-block U-turns, so you have no left turns at intersections. And the super streets reduce crashes and handle just as much traffic. So don't think it has to be a win-lose situation. But the longer term, it's a win for Hillsborough County if fewer people are getting killed on the streets.
Well, there's examples of road diets that move more traffic than before even.
Yes, there are plenty of those.
Over here. I went to USF for 4 years and graduated from there and lived in the area for 5 years without a car, and it was very difficult. I did my best to avoid at all times Fletcher, Fowler, and Bruceby Downs. I do think that traffic would be greatly alleviated there once we skinny the roads with commuter rail. But I also think that the most important thing to look at in that area is 42nd and 46th Street, because that is where we can incorporate more of a town center and actually increase the rate service of the C bus that goes straight to USF. And I believe Judy Genscheft is trying to do that at this time, but we're still getting more and more high-rise apartment buildings there without more transit or better streets. I saw that they recently repainted the bike lane mark, and I believe that that's the most they've done to address all the complaints about it. There's also no bus lane there. They're both two-lane roads, so they don't really have any access once the buses are going in commute, and it's very hard to access other than walking, but it's also a very dangerous walk. Is your organization looking at improving that area?
Well, is that within our scope?
We're Fowler from 30th to 56th.
So one of the things that we do is, we don't call it outreach, we call it engagement. We want to engage with you, we want to engage with other people here too. So we want that input, because I'm never going to know the things that you know about it and what you just told us about it. So please, engage with us. Let us know suggestions that you have.
Thank you so much for your conversation today. It's excellent. I live on 37th Street, one of the last single-family residential parcels in the USF area, and I can totally relate to what she said. There are streets that I cannot travel when school is in session, and they keep zoning out these parcels for high-density multifamily student housing, bring more people into the area. The one dormitory that they just permitted was 700 or 800 student beds, and it's on a street where at two streets effectively, two different complexes that you can't, when school's in session, you're 5 or 6 lights out from making a turn. And they're just putting more students, more people on these roads when there's no capacity already. How do you solve that in that area?
Well, one of the things that a number of institutions are doing, campuses are doing, we're doing it at some campuses in Illinois and in New York and New Jersey, is reducing the number of people that drive alone. And so you can have, if you have 90% mostly single occupant cars, you can move as many people in half as many cars if they just doubled up. The traffic would disappear. There are tools that are out there to have the same number of people moving, even in motor vehicles without transit, but I believe in transit, I believe in walking. So that's one way. This gentleman with the TPX shirt talked about the difference between accessibility and mobility. If you're building high-density housing and you're still requiring people to get in their cars, to use a quart of gas to get a quart of milk, then you're making the problem worse. But if you have stores, if you have shopping, if you have mixed land use, then people can walk to those destinations. So think about accessibility versus mobility. Mobility is what we've tried and what you've tried in the Hillsborough County area. Ultimately, it doesn't work. It's not working for you. It is killing people, and you still have a lot of congestion. So you have to think what Albert Einstein said. The definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. So start thinking a little differently. I think maybe one more question and then...
It's more of just a comment.
Yes.
I've been working with Sam and his project manager, Jeff Trim, on developing their scope of services. And I just want to point out that as they're looking at what could Fowler be, you're also going to do a project that looks at what can we do immediately to make Fowler safer. So that's the low-hanging fruit. What can we do immediately and make some changes there while we try to, convince everybody that Fowler could be very different. And the other thing is that the county is very involved with making sure that these projects just don't stop with a design, that we keep it going until it actually becomes a reality. So we're going to expand on these projects, and that will be our opportunity to look at other things. And I do know that the city, I think, has plans for 42nd and some improvements there. So that's all.
Do you want to end there? Can you take one more?
One last question.
Okay.
You had a question?
Yeah. I was one of the people that brought Gabe Klein here in January for the Urban Land Institute's Trends Conference, and I got the chance to drive him around Tampa and showing him the interstate. We're talking about autonomous vehicles. Obviously, we realize we need more options for moving around our county. A lot of the reasons why there's so much traffic around USF is there's only one way to get there, really, bus or car, and really people are just taking their car. What are you talking to other cities about how autonomous vehicles are going to shape what investments they need to make right now? Because we're basically being told that the only solution to congestion is more roads, meaning encouraging only driving. And 5 years, 10 years, 15 years from now, autonomous vehicles and other opportunities may be existing. So is our current footprint of 275, if we fix the bottleneck locations that are on 275, we just spent 10 years building out expanded 275 already, is that current footprint something that we should be able to rely on given all the other potential reductions in car usage, whether it be millennials not wanting cars, autonomous vehicles, car sharing, more urban, dense real estate development, stuff like that. Can we rely on some of our capacity? Gabe tells me, hey, you probably have enough capacity if you do other things. So should we be investing billions of dollars in expanding to fix something that is a problem right now? Or should we be, I'm trying to figure out what the target needs to be right now. Because these projects won't even be built for another 5 years. And we can do a lot more between now and then to reduce how much congestion we have those 2 hours a day.
Yeah, I'll talk more general. We are advising cities on how to deal with the arrival of autonomous vehicles. One of the things that autonomous vehicles, one of the really good things about it, there are a lot of good things and there are a lot of things that worry me about autonomous vehicles, but one of the good things is they can be almost as precise as train tracks. So you don't need as much asphalt for a lane of autonomous vehicles. You don't need the same width. The headways may also be reduced. So a lane that might be handling 2,000 vehicles an hour maybe handles 3,000. I don't know. We don't know the numbers yet. They're not quite there yet, and don't believe the height. But with those unknowns out there, by 2035, we may not need 12-foot wide lanes even on interstates. So things are changing, and they're changing quickly. And so the mistake that cities will make is if they do not change their city streetscape, and instead of taking a 4-lane road and say we now have autonomous vehicles and we make it a 6-lane road, instead of keeping it a 4-lane road and widening the sidewalks or creating plazas or pedestrian zones or parks. That is what we're advising other cities to do. So
I mean, it's
thank
almost
you.
like a self-fulfilling prophecy, isn't it? If you just keep widening, you're just gonna.
If you build it, and I showed you that slide, and you're
Yeah.
welcome to any of these slides, if there's a whole study on that, which you're welcome to read.
Yeah.
All right, well, first of all, thank all of you for coming today. We hope you'll join us each quarter for more great speakers like this coming in, not all as great as Sam, of course. Thank you to Tampa Innovation Alliance and to our partners in Hillsborough County and everybody for making this possible, and thank you, Sam.
Thank you very much.
Make a good point. It's a slightly unique problem. We see it on Nigeria, et cetera. I'm all for slow works. I get the slower.
Well, it seems like it was last night, he says, throw a jar, marbles,
What's your name?
it eventually, basically don't get through. You just throw for it through, then everybody gets through.
You're saying you have to sit on campus for 3 hours?
Yeah, it's not everybody.
Just a point that, hey, compared to some other more urban places, it's a little bit unique.
Everybody should pay attention to need a poor lighting and having a lot of like rural highways. Need the visibility. And actually Florida is the one,
Oh, trust me.
The north-south. Right, so you guys, things, I'll take both hearts.
At this point, you're talking about a mile out of your way to go around something, whereas in New York, it's a block. That's where Chapel down the road.
Well, the other issue